In modern cinema, few directors have mastered precision the way David Fincher has. His films feel engineered rather than merely directed. Every shadow measured, every line delivered with surgical intent. From the grim, rain-soaked streets of Seven to the cold digital glow of The Social Network, Fincher's work explores obsession, control, and the fragile psychology of people living in meticulously constructed worlds. He is a filmmaker fascinated by perfection and the cost of chasing it. His camera doesn't simply record, it interrogates. His edits don't just move the story forward, they dissect it. This is not the story of a director who stumbled into greatness. This is a story of a director who built it, frame by frame, take after take, until cinema itself began to feel engineered. Before the meticulous sets, the countless takes, and the reputation for perfectionism, David Fincher was simply a young observer fascinated by how images were constructed. Long before he became one of Hollywood's most recognizable visual stylists, he was studying the mechanics of cinema, how light shaped mood, how editing shaped time, and how performance could shift with the smallest adjustment. Fincher grew up during a period when filmmaking technology was rapidly evolving. As a teenager, he found himself captivated not only by finished movies, but by the invisible labor behind them. The camera, the set, the crew, the repetition. These details intrigued him as much as the stories themselves. While many future directors dreamed of storytelling, Fincher became obsessed with process. His early professional years were spent working in visual effects and commercial production, including time with Industrial Light and Magic, where he gained hands-on experience with the technical side of filmmaking. This environment trained him to think like an engineer as much as an artist. Precision wasn't optional, it was essential. Every frame required planning. Every effect required discipline. Every shot demanded control. From there, Fincher transitioned into directing commercials and music videos, quickly earning a reputation for a distinct visual style, darkly atmospheric, sharply edited, and meticulously composed. He collaborated with major artists, including Madonna, crafting videos that felt cinematic rather than promotional. These short-form projects became his training ground. They allowed him to experiment with tone, pacing, and visual storytelling while developing perfectionist tendencies that would later define his feature films. But the leap to Hollywood features proved difficult. His debut film, Alien 3, was a turbulent production filled with studio interference and creative compromise. For a director so focused on control, the experience was deeply frustrating. Scenes were altered, decisions were overridden, and the final product did not reflect the vision he had set out to create. For many filmmakers, such a debut might have ended their careers, or at least shaken their confidence beyond repair. For Fincher, it became a turning point. The experience forced him to confront the realities of studio filmmaking and the importance of creative authority. Rather than abandoning the industry, he stepped back, reassessed, and returned with a clearer understanding of the kind of director he wanted to be. That clarity would soon reshape his trajectory. He would return not as a newcomer trying to prove himself, but as a filmmaker determined to control every aspect of his craft, from performance and camera movement to editing and sound design. The lessons of his early years were simple but lasting. Cinema is built through discipline, refined through repetition, and perfected through control. These principles would guide everything that followed, laying the foundation for films that would define his career and establish his reputation as one of the most exacting directors of his generation. After the difficult experience of Alien 3, David Fincher stepped back from feature filmmaking, returning briefly to the world of commercials and music videos. It was a strategic retreat. Time to regain control, refine his voice, and wait for a project that would allow him to direct on his own terms. That opportunity arrived with Seven. From the opening frames, rain falling endlessly over a nameless city, Seven established a tone unlike most mainstream thrillers of its time. It was grim, methodical, and unflinching, rather than glorifying violence. Fincher presented it as something suffocating and inevitable. The film followed two detectives through a series of ritualistic murders, but beneath the investigation lay a deeper exploration of morality, obsession, and despair. With Seven, Fincher's visual identity fully emerged. Controlled camera movements, shadow-heavy lighting, and a pacing that allowed dread to build slowly rather than explode suddenly. Every shot felt designed to trap the viewer inside the film's oppressive atmosphere. It was not chaos on screen. It was carefully orchestrated unease. The film's success did more than establish Fincher as a major director. It gave him credibility and, more importantly, leverage. For the first time, he could pursue projects with greater creative authority. He followed with The Game, a sleek psychological thriller that continued his fascination with control and perception. The story of a wealthy man drawn into an elaborate reality-bending experience allowed Fincher to explore themes that would recur throughout his career. Systems within systems, games within games, and the unsettling idea that reality itself can be manipulated. But it was his next film that would push both his style and his reputation even further. In 1999, Fincher released Fight Club, an adaptation that initially divided critics and audiences. Darkly satirical and visually daring, the film dissected consumer culture, identity, and modern masculinity. Its raw energy and subversive tone made it controversial upon release. Yet over time it transformed into a cultural landmark. With Fight Club, Fincher demonstrated that meticulous control and narrative chaos could coexist. The film's editing, visual effects, and storytelling were intricately designed, yet the experience felt unpredictable and volatile. It was a perfect embodiment of his approach. Structure beneath disorder, precision beneath rebellion. By the end of the decade, Fincher had firmly established himself as a director with a distinct cinematic language. His films were not just stories. They were environments, carefully constructed spaces where characters confronted systems larger than themselves. The turbulence of his early career had not diminished his ambition. It had refined it. And as the new millennium approached, Fincher would continue to explore darker themes with even greater precision, moving deeper into stories of obsession, investigation, and the fragile human need for control. As the 2000s began, David Fincher entered a new phase of his career, one defined by patience, technological innovation, and an even deeper fascination with obsession. If his earlier films established his tone, this period refined his method. Fincher was no longer just shaping atmosphere. He was dissecting behavior. His 2007 film Zodiac became a defining project. Rather than a conventional thriller, it was a procedural meditation on time, uncertainty, and the psychological cost of chasing answers that may never come. The story followed journalists and investigators consumed by the hunt for the Zodiac killer. But the real subject was obsession itself. Years pass, leads collapse, lives narrow around a single question that refuses to resolve. Fincher approached Zodiac with an unusual level of restraint. Violence was rarely shown directly. Instead, tension lived in conversations, documents, and late-night research sessions. The film's deliberate pacing reflected the slow erosion of certainty. It wasn't about catching a killer. It was about what happens when the pursuit becomes a life's defining force. During this time, Fincher fully embraced digital filmmaking. Where many directors hesitated to abandon traditional film stock, he saw digital cameras as tools of precision. They allowed for more takes, more subtle adjustments, and more control over lighting and color. This shift aligned perfectly with the perfectionist tendencies. Scenes could be refined endlessly until performances felt completely natural and visually seamless. That digital precision carried into the social network, a film that might seem on the surface far removed from serial killers and psychological thrillers. Yet the thematic core remained familiar: ambition, systems, and the cost of obsession. The story of Facebook's creation became, in Fincher's hands, a study of rivalry, intellect, and emotional distance in an increasingly connected world. The film moved with a different rhythm, faster, sharper, driven by dialogue rather than dread. But the control was unmistakable. Every shot, every performance, every edit felt exact. Even scenes of people typing at computers carried tension, as if something larger were unfolding beneath the surface. Fincher's digital workflow allowed him to pursue the smallest details. A glance held a fraction longer, a line delivered with slightly different emphasis, a camera move refined until it felt invisible. He also extended this precision into television with Mindhunter, where his fascination with psychology and investigation found a long-form canvas. The series explored the early days of criminal profiling, focusing less on violence and more on conversation, the analysis of motive, pattern, and behavior. It was Fincher's sensibility in episodic form, controlled, atmospheric, and deeply analytical. By this stage of his career, Fincher had become more than a director of dark thrillers. He had become an architect of cinematic environments where obsession, ambition, and human fallibility intersect. His embrace of digital tools didn't make his films feel artificial. It allowed them to feel even more precise, more deliberate, and more immersive. In Fincher's world, the camera is not just an observer. It is an instrument of examination. And through that instrument, he continued to explore the same question that runs quietly through all his work. What happens when people devote themselves completely to something, an idea, a system, a pursuit, and discover that control is never as absolute as it seems? By the 2010s, David Fincher had fully established himself as one of the most meticulous filmmakers working in modern cinema. His reputation was no longer defined solely by tone or subject matter, but by process, an almost legendary commitment to precision that shaped every stage of production. Fincher's sets became known for repetition. Dozens of takes were not unusual, sometimes more than 100. To some actors, the process was demanding. To others, it was liberating. Fincher believed that repetition stripped away performance habits and self-consciousness. The more a scene was repeated, the more natural it became. By the final take, the performance felt lived in rather than performed. This philosophy reached a new level with Gone Girl, a film that explored perception, media narratives, and the fragile construction of identity within relationships. On the surface, it was a thriller about a missing woman and a suspect husband. Beneath that surface, it was an examination performance in everyday life, how people present themselves to partners, audiences, and the world. Fincher directed Gone Girl with the same clinical control that defined his earlier work, but with an added layer of thematic self-awareness. The film's characters constantly reshaped their own narratives, manipulating public perception as if they were editing a movie. It was a story about storytelling itself, about how truth can be constructed, framed, and revised. He continued this introspective approach with Mank, a black and white portrait of screenwriter Herman J. Mankiewicz and the turbulent creation of Citizen Kane. Unlike the sleek digital look of his previous films, Mank embraced an aesthetic inspired by 1940 cinema. High-contrast lighting, period-accurate sound design, and deliberate pacing. Yet even while recreating the past, Fincher relied on modern digital tools to achieve microscopic control over image and performance. This balance between tradition and technology became central to his later career. Fincher was not nostalgic for older filmmaking methods, nor blindly devoted to new ones. Instead, he used whatever tools allowed him the greatest precision. His work in streaming and long-form storytelling continued to expand his reach. Projects developed for modern platforms allowed him to explore character and atmosphere over extended durations, maintaining the same level of detail that defined his films. Whether working on a feature or a series, the approach remained consistent, refined until nothing feels accidental. At this stage, Fincher's cinema had become almost architectural in its construction. Every frame served a purpose. Every performance was shaped through repetition. Every scene fit into a carefully designed structure. Yet for all this control, his films remained deeply human. They explored insecurity, ambition, jealousy, and the need for recognition. The more precise the filmmaking became, the more clearly those human imperfections stood out. Fincher's career by this point revealed a paradox. He pursued perfection relentlessly, but his films often showed how impossible perfection truly is. And perhaps that tension is what defines his work most clearly. A filmmaker who builds worlds of exacting control to explore the chaos that lives inside them. After decades of meticulous filmmaking, David Fincher stands as one of the defining directors of modern cinema, not because he follows trends, but because he refines his craft with unwavering discipline. His career is not marked by sudden reinvention, but by steady evolution. Each project builds on the last, sharpening his approach to performance, tone, and visual precision. Fincher's later works continue to explore familiar terrain, ambition, identity, and the systems people construct to give their lives meaning. In films like The Killer, he returns to themes of routine and control through the story of a professional assassin whose life depends on precision. The film unfolds with quiet patience, focusing on process rather than spectacle. Preparation, observation, execution. Even in a story about violence, Fincher's attention is drawn to discipline and routine, the habits that create the illusion of mastery. This focus on process mirrors Fincher's own career. He is often described as perfectionist, but his work suggests something more nuanced. Perfection for Fincher is not an endpoint. It is a pursuit, a method of getting closer to emotional truth through technical control. By eliminating distractions and refining performances through repetition, he creates films that feel deliberate and immersive. His influence on contemporary filmmaking is significant. Many directors have adopted aspects of his style: muted color palettes, controlled camera movement, atmospheric sound design, and digital precision. Yet imitation rarely captures the underlying philosophy that drives his work. Fincher's control is not about rigidity for its own sake. It is about clarity, removing excess so that character and theme can emerge with greater focus. Younger filmmakers often cite his commitment to detail as inspiration. Editors study his pacing. Cinematographers analyze his lighting. Actors speak of the challenge and reward of working under his direction. Over time, his methods have become part of the language of modern filmmaking. Despite this influence, Fincher remains selective about his projects. He does not rush from one film to the next. Instead, he chooses stories that align with his interests, stories that examine people navigating complex systems, confronting their own limitations, or chasing goals that may ultimately consume them. His legacy is still unfolding. Unlike some directors whose styles soften over time, Fincher continues to refine his approach, exploring new technologies and storytelling formats while maintaining the precision that defines his work. Streaming platforms, digital cameras, and evolving production methods have not diluted his voice. They have given him more tools to shape it. Looking back across his filmography, from Seven to Fight Club, from Zodiac to The Social Network, a pattern emerges. Fincher's stories are rarely about heroes in the traditional sense. They are about individuals navigating complex realities, searching for meaning, control, or recognition in worlds that resist easy answers. His cinema does not promise comfort. It offers observation. It invites audiences to look closely at systems, at behavior, at themselves. In the end, David Fincher's work reminds us that filmmaking is both art and construction. It is emotion shaped by discipline, chaos refined through control. And as long as there are stories about ambition, obsession, and the fragile human desire for order, his influence will continue, quietly, precisely, frame by frame. David Fincher is famous for demanding extremely high take counts. Some scenes in his films have reportedly required 50 to 100 plus takes to achieve the exact performance and rhythm he wants. Before directing feature films, he worked at Industrial Light and Magic, where he helped on visual effects work for major productions. This technical background shaped his precise, detail-oriented style. Fincher directed iconic music videos for artists like Madonna, including Vogue and Express Yourself, which helped establish his dark, stylized visual signature. His feature debut, Alien 3, was such a difficult production that Fincher later distanced himself from the final cut and nearly left feature filmmaking altogether. Seven almost had a different ending. Fincher fought to keep the bleak original finale, which later became one of the most famous endings in thriller history. Fight Club was initially controversial and underperformed at the box office, but it later became a major cult classic and one of the most analyzed films of its era. Fincher was one of the first major Hollywood directors to fully embrace digital cinematography, especially during Zodiac, allowing him to shoot more takes and refine details without film stock limits. For The Social Network, he required multiple takes of fast dialogue scenes so actors could deliver lines with near-perfect timing and natural rhythm. He often uses invisible visual effects. Many environments in his films contain subtle digital enhancements that viewers never notice. Extended sets, adjusted lighting, or entirely digital backgrounds blended seamlessly into real footage. Fincher frequently collaborates with composer Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, whose atmospheric electronic scores have become a defining element of his later films. He prefers multiple monitors and precise playback systems on set, so he can immediately review and refine performances with exacting detail. Fincher rarely uses improvisation. Instead, he carefully storyboards scenes and refines performances through repetition until they feel natural rather than spontaneous. His films often explore characters obsessed with systems, detectives, programmers, journalists, or professionals, reflecting his own fascination with process and control. Despite his reputation for darkness, Fincher has a dry, understated sense of humor that occasionally surfaces in his films through subtle visual gags and ironic dialogue. The world of David Fincher is one of meticulous construction, exacting discipline and unflinching observation. His films are not acts of inspiration. They are carefully engineered experiences, built frame by frame, take by take, until every detail serves a purpose. Across decades of work, from the rain-soaked streets of Seven, to the chaotic yet precise energy of Fight Club, to the obsessive investigations of Zodiac, Fincher has consistently explored the tension between control and chaos, order and human imperfection. His mastery of technology, his embrace of digital precision, and his relentless pursuit of exacting performances have not made his films sterile. They have made them immersive, intense, and unforgettable. In every shadow, every camera movement, every silence, he asks viewers to observe, to question, and feel the subtle currents beneath the surface of human behavior. Fincher's legacy is not only in the films he has made, but in the way he has influenced a generation of filmmakers, editors, cinematographers, and actors. He proved that filmmaking is both art and engineering, a balance of creativity and control. And perhaps most importantly, he reminds us that perfection is not a destination. It is a process, a journey, and a lens through which the complexities of the human condition can be explored with clarity, intensity, and unwavering precision. In the world of David Fincher, nothing is accidental, yet everything feels inevitable. Every frame is deliberate, every story meticulously constructed. And through his work, we see not only cinema, but the human desire to understand, control, and make sense of the chaos around us.